Weight of Sacrifice, 1971. This is the name of session in today's Military Literature Festival, Lucknow.
Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome from Military Literature and Cultural Festival Foundation to all of you for this very special session of Military Literature Festival, Lucknow. Today's topic is Weight of Sacrifice. A special welcome to our guest, Captain Yashika Hatwal Tyagi from Ranchi, Chandar Sutta Dogra from Rajgarh, Solan, Captain Anil Gaur from Jammu, Major General Vijay Singh from Delhi, and his parent, Brigadier and Mrs. Hamir Singh, who will be joining us from Mau. Among the audience today are Mrs. Damayanti Tambe, wife of yet missing Flight Lieutenant Vasant Tambe. She is also the president of War Widows Association, a most respected body steered by Dr. Mohini Giri, which was set up way back in 1972. We also have with us Colonel Balwant Singh Nagyal, who was displaced from Chham when he was 6 years old and lived like a nomad for many years. Incidentally, his father, Saudagar Singh, was in my regiment 72 Armored, and he was there in the Chham battle in 1971, fighting to save that precious land, while at the same time his family was being displaced. We have leaned heavily on his research paper. In today's conversation, we talk on the various dynamics and dimensions of sacrifice, what it means to the nation, to the impacted, to the families, to the community, who carries the burden, what is the role of the government, what is the role of the people. We have to reflect on a very important facet. Should the sacrifices be eclipsed by the euphoria of a victory? We have chosen 3 different spheres of sacrifice, 2 based on books. Thank you, HarperCollins and Speaking Tiger, and 1 on a study to measure what is the real weight of sacrifice. It will be for the audience and citizens to mull over and to reflect. If you read the book of Chandar Sutta Dogra, your soul will stir. When you hear about the story of 20,000 displaced villagers from their home on account of Battle of Chham, your conscience will move. When you hear about the Battle of Daruchiya and courage, trials, and tribulations of Brigadier Hamir and his wife and his family, you will surely budge in your seats. Altogether, you may end up asking many questions. I will now hand you over to Captain Yashika for this intense conversation with our guest. Over to you, Yashika.
With great pride and huge sense of responsibility, I proceed to moderate for the session, Weight of Sacrifice. And I welcome the esteemed panel, Ms. Chandar Sutta Dogra, Captain Anil Gaur, Brigadier Hamir Singh, Veer Chakra, Mrs. Lakshmi Singh, Major General Vijay. Jai Hind to all of you. During a conflict, a soldier responds just like some inner war drums rolling like a muscle memory. That ultimate glory lies in sacrificing everything for Naam, Namak, Nishan of the Paltan. I salute the selfless, brave soldiers. So, ladies and gentlemen, if such is true, then is the term sacrifice different for the people in uniform and different for the people in CV street? What is the impact of sacrifice on wives, old parents, young children, sometimes unborn children still in the wombs of grieving mothers? Well, when does the glory of sacrifice turn into the weight of sacrifice? And when the conflict is over and all is well, is anyone thankful that someone chose to go through hell for them? On this note, ladies and gentlemen, let us begin the segment, Weight of Sacrifice, 1971. 3 guests, 3 stories of trials and tribulations, but we will see a different pehlu woven through a common thread. Let me welcome the first panelist for the evening, Chandarsutta Dogra. I welcome you, ma'am. She is an accomplished author and a seasoned journalist who has worked in national media for 3 decades. She has authored 2 critically acclaimed books, Manoj and Bubbly, A Hate Story by Penguin, and Missing in Action, The Soldiers Who Never Came Back. Over to you.
Why this book? Well, I wish somebody had written it much before this. 50 years is too long a period for us to be talking about this subject when it should have been resolved much earlier. But I'll just give you a brief account. It was in 2007 when the relatives of the missing people, missing soldiers, they were invited by Pakistan and they were going on a visit to search for their loved ones in Pakistani jails. Pakistan had facilitated that visit. So I just got curious and I was covering that story, and I did several stories. I was in Outlook magazine at that time. And then I followed up later once the visit was over, and quite naively, even at that time, I thought, you just never know, one odd person might come out as a result of that visit. It was quite, it wasn't to happen. But when I got in touch with the relatives and interacted more with them, and that is how the idea for the book concretized, and it's out today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, as I read in your book and also researched thereafter, India won 1971 war and an independent sovereign nation, Bangladesh, was created. That is a common knowledge. But we magnanimously repatriated 93,000 Pak prisoners of war. We all remember that amazing photograph of 16th of December when the surrender is taking place. We basked in the glory of international accolades. It was a euphoric moment for India. But we simply forgot. No, I will not use the word simply forgot. I will say we simply shamelessly forgot whether all our soldiers were repatriated and back home. Despite constant denial by Pakistan, multiple evidences have emerged that our 54 brave soldiers, some of them still from 1965 war, are still in Pak captivity. And their future, if we call it future, their future doomed in oblivion, far away from public memory, in dark, dank dungeons, subjected to horrible treatment in Pakistani jails. Why? Why we have not brought our sons back even after 50 years of winning 1971 war? And I read in your book, Chandarsutta, that you have mentioned that an Air Force pilot who was MIA was sent to US for training, United States Air Force pilots on Russian aircraft because it was a Cold War time. Another missing in action was seen in prison in Oman. Very strange stories. Now I want to ask you further to my previous question that what was the need for Pakistan to hold some some Indian soldiers back? Why did Pakistan not return all? And how did then Pakistan got around the provisions of Geneva Convention? Over to you.
Thank you, Yashika. This is an enduring 50-year-old question which refuses to go away as to why India gave away 93,000 Pakistani POWs. Now, just liberating Bangladesh was not enough. For the political leadership at that time, led by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, it was very important to concretize and firm up this victory by ensuring that Bangladesh is recognized as a sovereign nation by the world community. So one of the most important things which the Indian leadership felt was that Mujibur Rahman, who was facing gallows and he was tried for treason and he was in Mianwali jail in Pakistan, it was imperative that he should be released and sent back to Bangladesh to take on the presidentship. For this, as early as the first week of January 1972, just a few days after the war ended, Mrs. Gandhi struck a back channel deal with with Zulfikar Prime Minister, and the deal was that we will return your 93,000 POWs, and you will give us Mujibur Rahman, and he will be released and sent safely to Bangladesh. This was a back channel deal. Just a handful of close advisors were privy to it. And the military, of course, was completely in the dark. In fact, you will be surprised to know that the Shimla talks in July 1972, there was no military representative on the table during those talks. So, so by the time July 1972 happened, Indira Gandhi had achieved her three main important goals, that is liberation of Bangladesh, its recognition by the international community. By that time, 76 nations had recognized Bangladesh except for Pakistan and China. And Mujibur Rahman was in Bangladesh and had taken over charge as the president. Now, when the Shimla talks took place, we also need to understand that when we talk about 93,000 POWs, this is we are talking mainly about those who were captured from the Eastern Front, that is the Bangladesh side, the Bangladesh border, etc. Whereas there were about 545 Pakistani army soldiers who were captured from the Western Front. Their repatriation got delayed because it got linked with the recognition of Bangladesh. Pakistan was not doing that, and so there was a lot of wrangling going on. Now, to come back to our missing personnel, while all this was happening, India had broadly identified that roughly 800 odd of our people are missing in action. After accounting for those who were dead and injured, about 834. But at the same time, while there was wrangling at the political level, at the diplomatic level, 2 years had elapsed. A lot of these families had to be given benefits. Women had to rebuild their lives, little children had to be brought up. And India does not have, or it did not have at that time, a missing in action category. It was either killed in action or injured, or, well, you come back. So it was, and to get those pensionary benefits or whatever other benefits, it was a death certificate was essential. So a lot of these people were categorized as killed in action just to enable the families to get benefits. So it was a technical, it was a technical anomaly which enabled the military. And then once, you know how bureaucracy is, whether it was a military bureaucracy or the civilian, once a thing is entered into the files and a person is categorized as killed in action, everyone moves on and people feel, oh, well, unko benefits mil gaya hai, and the matter is sorted out. In fact, evidence, even when the Shimla talks were being held, there was no evidence at that time that Pakistan had retained some of these people. It was only at the end of 1974, by which time the POW chapter had been closed by both nations, Pakistan as well as India and Bangladesh, as to why these people were kept back. It was closed, and that is when the evidence, the first unsettling piece of evidence, came in the form of a handwritten note by Major A.K. Suri from 5 Assam Regiment, that we are 20 officers here. He wrote that from Karachi. We are 20 officers here. Please do something. Speak to the Indian government. We are well, but you need to speak. I mean, this was a letter which reached his father somehow, a very roundabout route, but it reached him, and that's how then the government of India, and there was more evidence also which was trickling in from various other sources, but this was the most clinching. Now, your other question as to why these people were kept, and this is something which Pakistan diplomats, even in India, a lot of political leaders, whenever the families would go to meet A politician or B politician, the defense minister or the prime minister, they would ask you, why do you think they would keep, we were victorious, we were the victors. That's precisely one of the reasons. Now, you have to remember that Bhutto had succeeded in getting an assurance from Indira Gandhi that the 92,000 prisoners, civilian as well as military, captured from the Eastern Front would be returned. His concern was only for the 195, mainly senior army officers, which Bangladesh and some sections in India also wanted that they should be tried for war crimes. You know, there was huge massacre, genocide, etc. in Bangladesh before the war. And there was a lot of bitterness that these are the people who are responsible for killing our people, and why should they get away scot-free? But for Bhutto, it was absolutely important that these people should not be tried for war crimes. They should not be sent to Bangladesh, but they should be returned to Pakistan. So he was not worried about the rest because he knew that he'd done a back channel deal with Indira Gandhi. Those would return. But even the Indian leadership was also toying with the idea of handing over these 195 to Bangladesh for trials, to face trials. So while all this was happening, and India had almost made its intention clear through various media interviews and other in other ways that there is a possibility. So while all this was happening, it's very likely that some of the people who were still in Pakistani custody Pakistan would have thought that let's keep them as a bargaining chip in case our 95 are not returned. As things panned out later on, there was a deal and the 195 were returned to Pakistan. So the thinking in diplomatic circles and in government circles at that time is that these are men. I mean, one is not sure whether it was exactly 54. It could be just 15 or 18 or 20 of them. But as per Major Suri's letter, he says we are 20 of us. 20. So it could be a few more. Those soldiers just lost their relevance and fell through the cracks because there is another reason. Now 3-4 years had elapsed, and assuming that some of them had been kept back by Pakistan, there is the condition in jails or in military detention centers. I don't think they were even put in jails at that time. Is quite deplorable. There was they could have been tortured. They could have been they could have become mentally unstable. So the thinking is that their condition deteriorated and it became an embarrassment for Pakistan. I mean, if at all Pakistan had to admit, okay, yes, we have, because by late 70s or mid 70s, when the Indian government began getting some information that possibly some of our people have been held back, and it began asking Pakistan in various bilateral meetings to please return our people. By that time, it became an embarrassment for Pakistan to even admit that we have people in such condition. So it had no choice but to deny their existence.
But 50 years.
50 years. Because it would have invited international criticism. How have you violated the Geneva Convention? Why have you held back these people? And so now that brings me to your other question. How did Pakistan get around the Geneva Conventions, which mandate that as soon as hostilities end, you have to repatriate? But let me tell you, the Geneva Conventions, of course, it's a great tool for nations, and a humanitarian tool by which hostile nations can get back their people at the end of wars. But most often it is observed in the breach, as we have seen that even in the India-Pak 1971 war. A lot of these people, it is suspected, and possibly, people in the government talk about it, old diplomats, they talk about it, which means that they had some information that a lot of these people had been categorized as security prisoners, which is a euphemism for spies. So once you categorize a person as a spy, he ceases to be a prisoner of war, a POW, and then does not come under the ambit of the Geneva Conventions. Certain spying activities, which were of course going on in the run-up to the war and even later, could have been slapped on these men, and that is how. And in fact, there is more evidence to this, because when Major Suri's father was investigating, he had a lot of contacts, and he had even links with some American diplomats posted in Islamabad at that time. A couple of them told him that your son is on the injured list, one, and he is not categorized as a prisoner of war. He's being held as a security prisoner. Of course, I mean, this was just some information which he got informally, so it was very difficult for him to, produce it in any concrete form. But this is one of the ways in which Pakistan got around the Geneva. It simply recategorized these people. So in bilateral meetings, whenever India would say, even at the prime ministerial level, discussions have taken place on our missing soldiers with Vajpayee ji, and even Indira Gandhi has broached this topic several times in bilateral meetings. When they ask for prisoners of war, Pakistan very clearly has denied that we don't have any POWs. Because, I mean, it's a technicality. They are simply not being, or were not kept as POWs. So we could say with a straight face that we don't have them.
Yeah. So all these technicalities simply led to so much of time that after a point of time, their relevance seemed to just make no sense for governments. They were just numbers. But Chandrasutha, hope dies last in war. You see, since last half a century, the families of missing soldiers are keeping that flame of hope alive, and they are resolute like Rock of Gibraltar. These men since last 50 years are neither in the ranks of living nor dead. And the saddest part is, no one cares. Has the weight of sacrifice or the onus to bring back their loved ones fallen on the frail shoulders of the NOK? And does the nation have any answer for Damayanti Tambe, Simi Varech, G.S. Gill, Raghuraj Tyagi, Dolly Advani, Kamlesh Jain, Nirmal Kaur, Suman Purohit, and I shudder to think, what will it take for the matter? This is my question to you, and then we will move on to the next speaker.
See, this is a very difficult question, but it's not difficult to achieve a closure, because any kind of closure has to be on the basis of a reciprocity. If India wants its men back, or wants to know how they died, because after so many years, there is a possibility that most of them may not be alive anymore. But we still need to account for them. We still need to know how they died. Did they die in prison? Did they die in action? Did they die while undergoing torture? Or did they die in hospital because of their injuries? I mean, there are so many possibilities but we need to know. And for that to happen, I'll just take 2 minutes of your time to explain what the US and Russia, two bitter enemies of the Cold War, how have they resolved this issue? There is a joint American, Russian, or missing in action POW commission. They have a commission which has cells in the embassies in Moscow as well as in Washington. And these cells, missing in action cells, they conduct research, they interview old war veterans, they try and get to the bottom of how they have a list of people who are missing. So, I mean, that search is still continuing, and these two nations have been able to put in place a mechanism like this.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and views and on the book. Lest we forget that freedom is not free, and posterity must understand that the sacred fire of liberty and union have been kept burning at a mighty cost. And nowhere is this signified more as in cadets mess at NDA Khadakwasla, where a table for one is kept in the eternal wait with the prayer of remembrance. Let us move to the next segment of the session. Next panelist is Gaur. He is a seasoned veteran who is untiringly working towards restoring the culture.
and it's an honor to be here and also sharing this webinar Zoom meeting with Mrs. Damayanti. It reminds me of the memories that when I was a school kid, I played badminton with her when she was just a young bride married to Flight Lieutenant Tambe in Ambala in Surendra.
It's a small word, sir.
Well, Yashika, coming to your question,
Sir.
Chamb and its surrounding is a flat agriculture area, which is approximately 30 kilometers to the west of Jammu town, bordering India and Pakistan, and has strategic importance for both the countries. For Pakistan, it was the route to capture the vital Akhnur Bridge, which is not only the lifeline of Rajouri and Poonch districts of J&K, but could also be used to threaten the city of Jammu and cut off the line of communications between India and Kashmir Valley and Ladakh. For Indians, it could be the launching point to attack the crucial Pakistan north-south line of communications between Gujarat and Tanda, passing via Gujarat, thus split Pakistan into two, effectively dismembering it.
This is just such a sad story that merely their place on map has made them the cynosure and at the eye of storm for all these troubles. Sir, history has strange parallels. We were just hearing Chandrasutta Dogra that after 1971 war, India returned 93,000 plus POWs of Pakistan, but failed to get back all of our own. Similarly, with India's efforts, a new sovereign nation, Bangladesh, was created, and also hundreds of square kilometers of Pakistani territory was returned. But this time again, we failed to negotiate to get back Chamb and its 28 villages. And overnight, thousands of citizens of Chamb turned refugees in their own free country. While nation was celebrating and euphoric in the victory, the people of Chamb lost everything. So my question to you is, why did India abandon the entire area of Chamb? Why did we not take it back? As we did not take our 54 back, why did we not take Chamb back, sir? That's my question.
That's the whole point. You see, India and Pakistan both gave up areas gained across the international border in the 71 war.
Sir.
Surprisingly, even after being the victor, India gave up more area than Pakistan. Pakistan got 190 square kilometers in the Chamb region of Jammu and Kashmir, right up to the west of Manawar Tawi. India gained an area in Ladakh region where the Ladakh scouts pushed the border 20 kilometers to the north of what was the border before the war. The control of this area enabled India later on to control the Saichen Ridge in 1984. The area thus retained by India in this region were marked and identified by the Indian Army, keeping in mind any further confrontations and unnecessary adventures that Pakistan might partake in the future. The entire Chamb Niyabat of 4,900 families, approximately 20,000 souls living in 29 villages and about 39,000 acres of fertile agriculture land was sacrificed for these rocky mountains of Ladakh. This decision was taken by the powers in Delhi without even giving a thought to the human tragedy of uprooting people from their homes and hearth, and not even giving them time to collect their personal belongings, cattle, and other possessions, leading to one of the most sordid human tragedy stories of the war of 71 for India.
My God, it is as heart-wrenching. You have been working closely with the displaced people of Chamb, and you have seen their plight. And today we implore upon you, sir, please be their eyes and heart and voice for us today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Yashika. Now, see, in all wars with Pakistan, the most affected people in J&K have been the border dwellers of Chamb.
Yeah.
20,000 plus people of Chamb Niyabat, consisting of 29 villages in the border area of Jammu, have faced deprivations of the 47 partition and the 1965 Grand Slam war with Pakistan. Many who were uprooted in these two events left for Jammu and other parts of the state and settled down to pick up a new life. But however, These people's deprivations were not so severe as those suffered by the people still living in Cham during the War of 1971. Being conversant with 47 and 65 wars and apprehending the risk of life involved, the people started coming out of this battle zone in the first week of September 71, before the actual war started. Now, these people moved in columns, crossed the river Munawartavi, and marched directionless towards east, with the only goal of reaching the safety of Jammu. Hardships suffered by these people are beyond the comprehension of normal human beings. Can you imagine how and what the harshest of the bone-chilling Jammu winter toll was on them? The main victims were elders, women, and children. These God-forsaken peoples stayed in many days alongside the road and canal without any overhead protection and survived on dried chapatis and achar that they had packed. Most of the time, they just filled their bellies with water. Dressed in torn clothes, and the dust on their bodies made them invisible to themselves. They carried the burden of fate for many days to come, marching on, forlorn, and not knowing what the future held for them. These waves of human sufferings, agonies, and pains swept across the river Munawartavi in terror, on foot, and panic due to the onset of hostilities. Dazed and shell-shocked human beings walked in the open like a herd of cattle without any direction. At nightfall, they crumpled along the wayside, struck fires to cook food and keep themselves warm against the quivering cold weather conditions. They carried on with the same clothes, often with one sandal shoe for months together. Elderly men and women went piggyback on their sons. Pregnant women on their husbands, and young children onto their fathers and mothers. The crippled, the sick, and the dying added to their sufferings. Women were seen carrying a few cooking utensils, ghee, pickle, some valuables, and young children on their heads and shoulders. Men were seen carrying a wooden pole on their shoulders to carry the infants and sacks of grains on each side. Their animals too shared their distresses and liabilities of fate with their owners and marched persistently along with their masters, even sometime ahead of them, to show the course of the tramp. This was not just a small journey to another village with these people of Cham Niyabat were making, but was a march with no coming back to their roots. Each step taken forward was laden with fatigue and starvation, and every step taken backwards was loaded with the past of sadness and sufferings of thousand counts. These displaced persons were ready to give away their valuables for a morsel of grain. These ill-fated people sought shelters at every possible place, be it an abandoned building, school, shed, even a tree. We people sitting in the comforts of our homes could not even begin to fathom the horror which these unfortunate border dwellers went through. Now, till the onset of the hostilities of the actual war on 3rd December 71, some people could go across Munawartavi to attend their cattle, crops, and elderly and infirm people left behind there as caretakers. But on this fateful day of 3rd December, they faced the brunt of war, and most of them couldn't come back alive, and their fate was never known. This was adding another chapter to their sufferings. The Indian Army suffered defeat in this sector and had to destroy the bridge at Mandyala crossing on river Munawartavi due to the pressure of Pakistan Army. This not only stopped the movement of the enemy, but paved the way for a permanent loss of Cham sector to Pakistan. On the fateful day of ceasefire, 16 December 1971, Pakistan had acquired the land up to the west of Munawartavi in this sector. Now, it was only in the second week of January 1972 that these displaced persons of Cham sector were loaded in buses and trucks and were taken to camps at Manwal and Kishanpur near Udhampur, about 70 kilometers from Jammu. One second, yeah. After staying there, after staying in fear and insecurity, these displaced persons are now thrown in open at Manwal and Kishanpur to fend for themselves with just one tent covering about 13 square feet for a family of 6 to 8 persons. This big victory over Pakistan gave no consolation to these people who were left to starve and shiver in these tents. What a painful experience this was. Sights at the camps were pathetic. Streets were desolate. Household things were strewn about. Young children were crying of hunger. Parents were helpless as they didn't have anything to feed their children except tears and false promises. There was no privacy in these tents, and they offered no protection against bad weather conditions. The ground was rocky, and there was no separate place for cooking and bathing. Earthen chulas were made in front of the tents without any overhead covering for the cooking. Initially, fresh water was supplied through tankers by the government, but later on supplied through pipes. This was insufficient, and hence people used to get water from the nearby Baulis, the natural springs. People would bathe in the open near the tents, and potholes were created at many places for the wastewater. There was scarcity of basic sanitation, hygiene, and medical facilities. There were no separate bathing, toileting facilities for women, and they had to take bath in the hours of darkness. It was a shame of the country that these displaced persons who owned land and houses in Cham Niabat were made to live like animals in conditions alien to them.
You are right, sir, in using the word, it's shame of the country. It's shame of the country.
Now, the questions to be asked is, how can the politicians and bureaucrats be so inhuman as to make their citizens suffer such deprivations by preferring barren peaks over the dignity and self-respect of their citizen? India could have had both. That is the barren peaks plus Cham Niabat. But our leaders and negotiators failed in their task of protecting the rights of the citizen. The Shimla Agreement holds no value more than the paper on which it was written and signed. This is what it was.
Very strong words there, sir, but very right. And actually, the responsibility to share the weight of the sacrifice given by people of Cham cannot be more highlighted in the case of border dwellers in every war, especially in LC environment when they are casualty at every war or at every conflict. Please share with us the rehabilitation and resettlement efforts undertaken by the government to bring at least a sense of normalcy in their lives, which of course can never be normal, but something that government has to do to resettle them, to rehabilitate them. If you could share those with us.
Yashika, you'll be surprised to know that it took the government 3 years. That is in 1974 that they started to form. They formed a committee to look into the rehabilitation of these displaced persons of Cham. That is, for 3 years, the government of India, after this tremendous victory, allowed these people to live in those camps in this squalor. Now, this committee divided this displaced person into 2 categories. Again, one was the camp and one was the non-camp. Now, as the name suggests, the former were those people who lived in camps at Kishanpur and Manwal, and the latter, those who did not live in these camps, but elsewhere in the J&K state. So they had a different yardstick for both these categories.
We can't thank you enough today for being the voice of the people of Cham on this platform and to bring out the weight of their sacrifice in such an eloquent manner. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for giving me the time.
Without memory, there can be no culture. Without memory, there can be no civilization, no society, no future. These tragedies evoke strong emotions, and I welcome General H.K. Singh to share with us few lines from his pen.
I will just take 2 minutes and 30 seconds to put this in a poetic perspective. There is a great hill next to the Cham from where you can overlook everything. It is called the Kacharial Hill, where there are a number of memorials. I've gone there a number of times, so I look at it. Sometimes villagers come and sit with me. It moved me much, so I wrote a poem some time back. मेरा भी एक गांव था, मेरा भी एक देश था, गोगी था, बरसाला था, मनव्वर, छम और मंगोटिया, देवा भी तो मेरा देश था। एक कलकल करती नदी, कई नाले, झरने और नीला आसमान। I love the rising sun when it hit the Fagla Mandyala ridges. I love the setting sun when it highlighted the Trikuta hills. दाने चुगते तीतर, नाचते मोर, भागते हुए मुर्गे, रात को गीदड़ की चीखें और जंगली सुअर का गुरगुराना, मंदिर में बजते नगाड़े और घंटियां, त्योहारों में नाचती सुंदरियां, बरसाला का स्कूल और लड़के लड़कियां, लहलहाते खेत और भरपूर खलिहान, मनव्वर के बहते पानी के गान गान और शिकार करते हुए नौजवान, सरकंडे के बीच से सनसनाती हुई ठंडी पुरवाई, पश्चिम से आती हुई कड़कती पछवाई, दिन को रात को आज भी देती है दुहाई। फिर क्यों दे दिया मेरा छम बार बार, क्यों मेरे दिल को कर दिया तार तार, पूरे देश में भटकते हैं हम 20,000। वेयर इज माई मदरलैंड एंड वेयर इज माई बिलोंगिंग, कहाँ है मेरा देश की परवानगी, बट यू आर स्टिल नम, व्हाई नॉट अंडरस्टैंड माई नीड यू डम, I am not giving up my longing. I too have a deep sense of belonging. मैं चाहता हूं कि मेरे मंदिरों में फिर से घंटियां बजे, हमारे बच्चे छम में दोबारा फूले फले। सैकड़ों ने जान गंवा दी थी छम की खातिर, बहुत तंग कर रहा था वो शातिर। कुछ लाज तो रख लो उन शहीदों का ए मालिक, हमारे लिए भी तो कर लो कुछ हासिल। 5 लाख या 25 लाख तो बोरे में है एक दाने के समान, मेरा छम और 28 गांव तो सोने हीरे मोती के हैं समान। हमारे कई गांववासी भी हुए थे शहीद, हमारे समान लुट गए थे और हम हो गए थे मरीज। छम्ब की अभिलाषा कब होगी पूरी, कब हम करेंगे ये दूरी, छम्ब की लालसा अमर है, छम्ब की चाहत जटल है। आई स्टिल लॉन्ग फॉर माई छम, बट ऑल आई डू इज टू लुक एट इट फ्रॉम द कचरियाल हिल्स। फिर रोने लगता है मेरा दिल। मेरा गांव, मेरा देश. This is one of the greatest stories of the Cham about which our citizens have generally not been aware. I request Yashika to move on with the next episode.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that poem. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to our next speaker for the evening. Just to introduce him, just to share the screen space with him is a matter of great pride for me. Brigadier Hamir Singh Veer Chakra. In today's session, we are speaking of weight of sacrifice in context of 1971 Indo-Pak War fought for the liberation of Bangladesh. And the story reaches a crescendo when we hear from a war hero who led the assault, crying out the war cry, filling his men of valiant 14 grenadiers with josh as they fought through the battle of Dhruchia till Akhiri Goli, till the valiant hero was taken prisoner of war. And despite multiple injuries, he survived in Pakistani jails for long, harrowing months. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not every day that we hear a lion roar. Brigadier Hamir is a third-generation army officer coming from the bloodline of Rajput Mirtia warriors. In his case, a large part of the weight of sacrifice was carried by his wife, Lakshmi, who lived through the trials and tribulations of uncertainty when her husband was taken prisoner of war. Thank you, ma'am, to share your story.
Thank you.
Brigadier
Thank you
Hamir
very much,
Singh's-
ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Brigadier
Welcome.
Hamir's eyewitness account has been recorded by his son, Major General Vijay Singh, in book titled POW 1971, a soldier's account of the Battle of Dharuchia. And it is being released shortly by the renowned publishers Speaking Tigers. Welcome, Vijay. Let us begin with your account. You were a young boy when your father, Brigadier Hamir, was taken POW. And it takes a strong family to emerge out of challenging times like these. Tell us about your book. Tell us, what was your inspiration to write this book and release it in this golden jubilee year of 1971? Over to you.
Thank you, Yashika. Good evening, everyone. The first part of the question is, what is the book about and why has it taken 50 years to write about this book? The first thing is that you really can't set a time for these things. In India, one has not heard much of PTSD, but it's a fact. As far as my father is concerned, when he came back to India, he was extensively debriefed. And in that debriefing, he has given all that he had to say. And as a good soldier thereafter, he has kept it in his heart over many years. Personally, for me, we were always eager to know what happened. And I think possibly the reason was that I was too young earlier. And then I got busy with my career, and so did my brother. My brother also, incidentally, is a major general right now. So both of us are serving generals. We didn't have the time earlier. Finally, I think it took COVID to give me time, and it was a lockdown that I actually started writing this book. And I must tell you, it's been an extremely emotional time for all of us, the entire family, to speak about it. Many nights have gone where we couldn't sleep properly talking about those incidents. And I don't think in this book, I can probably write of the recordings which my father did. We recorded all the book has been done based on the recordings of my father. And if you hear those, they are much more emotional or much more heart-rendering than what you'll probably see or hear or read in the book. As far as the book is concerned, I must tell you this, that the motivation for it was, this year we've been hearing about a number of battles. We are celebrating the 50 years of 71. But you would have heard of Longewala, movies have been made on it. You heard of Battle of Basanta, you heard of Battle of Hilli, because Paramveer Chakras have been awarded for these battles. But I'm sure not many of you today, including the military people, would have heard of the Battle of Dharuchia. And there's a very simple reason to it. And there's no easy way to talk about it. There's no way I can cushion the fact that the Battle of Dharuchia was actually a failed attack. It is an unfortunate and sad reality that if you lose a battle, your entire episode or your entire history or whatever you did in that battle gets relegated in the pages of history. You never hear about them. But what is the cost? May I have the next slide, please? I want to show you a newspaper cutting of 14th December 1971. At the bottom left corner, you'll notice a little small column. It says, it's talking about the Battle of Dharuchia. The Indian officers were leading from the front, and almost all the company officers had lost their lives in the assault. And it's a fact. At that point of time, it was believed that everyone had died, including my father. In less than 12 hours, 10 officers, 7 JCOs, and 149 other ranks were either killed, wounded, or missing in battle. And I want you to remember this figure. This is perhaps the most deadly battle of the 71 war. I don't think there's been anyone who's lost more people in 1971 than the 14 Grenadiers. I forgot to mention also that the officers of 14 Grenadiers are also listening on to what we are speaking. I'm very happy to connect with 14 Grenadiers again, a very brave unit which took part in this battle. Now, another characteristic of lost battles, especially attacks, is that there are no gallantry awards given to this. Getting gallantry awards for failed attacks has been an exception. And if you look internationally, and also if you look at the Indian battles, you see the Paramveer Chakras, Veer Chakras, and Mahavir Chakras. And I may not be absolutely correct, but you will rarely find internationally and in India gallantry awards given for an attack which has lost. There are exceptions to this. And I must bring to mind the Battle of Balaklava, which has been immortalized in the famous poem of Sir Alfred Tennyson, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Officers and people of my students of my generation have heard this. And in this battle, this is perhaps one of the few battles where a lost battle, a lost attack, achieved a very famous landmark, in that there were 9 Victoria Crosses given in that battle. 9 Victoria Crosses, I repeat. If you compare the people who were lost in battle in the battle of, or in the Charge of the Light Brigade, the people who were killed, wounded, or missing in action were 9 officers against the Daruchian 10, 14 sergeants against the Daruchian 7, 156 other ranks against the Daruchian of 149. So I'd like to say that the amount of loss that India occurred in Battle of Daruchia is comparable to the Charge of the Light Brigade. And as far as the comparison of gallantry awards is concerned, 9 Victoria Crosses against none immediately after the battle. There were 2 VRCs which were given almost a year and a half later. That was in January 26, 1973, after the repatriation of my father and his debriefing at Delhi, and the debriefing of the fellow prisoners of war who actually took part in the battle. It is based on their commendation, based on their feedback, that both Captain Gosai, who was the artillery officer of 196 Field Regiment with my father, who lost his life, and my father got Veer Chakras. My father felt it was his belief that all these people have no mention in history. My father and Captain Gosai have been mentioned in history, but all the others have no way in history. No one knows what they did. So this book is actually my father's dedication to the memory of the brave men who fought with him, and that has been the motivation of this book. Before I hand over back to you, Rashika, I just want to quickly tell you that this photograph that you see is my father's return to Delhi Cant railway station, and that's my brother and me standing there in front of my mother. We are back. This is December 1972. So this book actually covers the battle in the first part. In the second part, it is about his life in the hospitals of Delhi, hospitals of Rawalpindi, Pakistan. The third part is about his life in the POW camp at Lyallpur. And the last part, which is an equally insignificant part, is what happened after he came back to India. And I'm very grateful to the Speaking Tiger who have taken on this book, and I think it's a good time to do it. Very quickly, I'll just take you to the next slide, please. I want to get you to the battle, exactly what happened. Now you can see Daruchia. In fact, Daruchia at the moment in this slide is covered under the clouds. You're looking at Daruchia from the Indian side of the border. In fact, you will agree with me, it looks very beautiful, very innocent. Not many people know that how many people lost their lives on those slopes of Daruchia. Next slide, please. I want to go through the attack plan and tell you what really happened. Now, firstly, as far as the plan was concerned, it was an extremely audacious plan. If you look at this slide, you're looking at this from the top, you can see a point 471 right at the bottom of the side. That is the Indian position. And the objective was Daruchiya, which you can see in front in the red circle. Now from 471, that is the Indian side, if you wanted to attack Daruchiya, you would go down the mountain slope, cross those days they used to call it the CFL, that is the ceasefire line, which is now the LOC. You would cross the line and start climbing the slopes of Daruchiya. That was the way that you went for the battle. Now the audaciousness in the battle was the unconventional attack, that the attack was to be done from all four sides. So virtually there were no reserves. And the last, not the last, I would say another important point was the artillery support. Now you can imagine you're firing from 471 or that general area of 471 and that side. Now when the artillery fires from there, you're going to be firing probably over your own men. And if the shells don't fall on the Daruchiya top, they will fall across and will get casualties on your own people behind. And another very crucial factor in the entire thing was, for his own reasons, the commanding officer decided to remain at 471. And the reserve which was given to them was another company of another battalion. That reserve also was kept at 471. Now it is the reason that he says was that because it was to control the battle, but controlling the battle at night without seeing it and without any other means excepting a radio set was perhaps not the best thing to do. Next slide, please. And now this slide is giving you the names of all the people, and all those crossed in red are the people who had lost their lives at the time that my father was to go for the attack. Now the first person to attack was the one from the south. As you can see, the names Major Chahal, he was the company commander. His 2IC was Lieutenant Bahupindi. His 3IC, that is the JCO, was Jay Singh, and the artillery officer SS Vashist of 196 Field Regiment. Now they were to start the attack at 11 o'clock in the night. When the attack was to start, before it would start, my father's company was to be in place. That is the one behind Daruchiya. The reason was that if they were behind Daruchiya, if the enemy tried to escape, they would be able to cut them off, which meant that this company had to go into the enemy territory at night without being detected, and they had to go a long circuitous route in this diagram from the left and get behind the enemy. So it was a long distance with heavy loads, and it had to be done silently. So this movement was taking place. My father's company went ahead. They're the ones who left at about 8 p.m. in the night. And thereafter, Major Chahal proceeded for the attack. Unfortunately for them, it was heavily mined. And in that process, Major Chahal lost his leg. And despite losing his leg, he carried on advancing with his troops. And they reached about 50 or 80 meters short of their objective. And by the time they reached there, all the 4 officers lost their lives. Now it was the time for the next attack, Major Dogra to take off from the east. Now when Major Dogra went there, again, a bit of bad luck. He got killed in a MMG fire. His 2IC, who was following behind, lost a leg in battle. He had to be evacuated. And the JCO, Subedar Bhavar Singh, in trying to rescue or retrieve the body of Major Dogra, not lost his life, he became very seriously injured. So this prong also lost entire leadership. There was no leadership left of 2 companies at this point of time. The third company was Major Khan's company, an extremely brave officer. He went ahead, and unfortunately, again, in a burst of fire, he lost his life. Now at this point of time, it was almost midnight. And the CEO realized that the only company which was actually alive or was left was my father's company. And they were told, okay, now you launch the attack from, instead of trying to cut off the enemy, you launch the attack from behind the enemy. So they launched the attack. And luckily for them, because they were able to surprise the enemy, they were able to reach up to the edges of the objective and capture the initial bunkers of the objective. And once they captured it, they were asked where they were, and when they mentioned that they had reached, no one could believe that someone had succeeded. And in this duration, while they were attacking, the enemy finally realized that they're being attacked from behind. And at that point of time, all hell broke loose on this company. They were 3 or 4 counterattacks in the night, but the company held fast. And when one of the counterattacks, Lieutenant Dalal also lost his life. Now there were only 3 of them left: my father, Taj Muhammad, and Gosai. Now they fought the whole night, and by the time it was morning, the brigade commander realized the battle is not going well, so he took over the battle from the CO. And then at about 11 o'clock, he told my father that what is the situation. Now the situation at that time was my father's company had about 30 people left. In the overnight fighting, my father had got wounded in his chest and his right hand. And therefore his right hand and chest was, his chest was bandaged, his right hand was in plaster, and he couldn't obviously fire a weapon. And Dalal was dead by that time. And now it was left to these 30 men and this rack, the remnants of this company, to try and capture Darucia. And at that point of time, the Darucia top was about 100-150 meters away from them. And the counterattack, people who had counterattacked them, they were all in contact with this company at about 100 yards away. So they were being surrounded from almost the 2 sides which counterattacks were launched. And in the morning, when my father looked behind, on the same slopes which they had climbed, a fresh company of the enemy was attacking. So they were now literally surrounded from 3 sides, and the only side left was the top of Darucia. Now the orders given to the brigade, by the brigade commander passed the orders to them that now what we'll do is we will have an air attack on Darucia. This is at about 11 in the morning. 11:30, these planes will come, and these planes will carry out a bombardment. And once this bombardment takes place, immediately after that, once the enemy's head is down, this company would charge. And it's broad daylight now. There's no cover between their position and the final assault. So the plan was very simple. 15 people were to stay behind, including Taj Muhammad and Gosai, who were to actually fire and give them protection from that position. My father, with about 15 men, would attack. And this is now a time, he's got about 15 minutes left. It's about 15 minutes to 11:30. The planes are about to come in 15 minutes. And now this is the time that I would like to hand over back to Yashika. I'm sorry I've taken a little more time. I just wanted to explain the way the battle took place. And now I would request you to take it ahead from here. Before this, you can come to the previous slide back, please. Previous slide. Yeah, now I'll request Yashika, you can please take it over from here.
I am left speechless, and in my mind, I'm only picturing the entire scene. You have brought it out so wonderfully. Brigadier Hamir sir, right now the station where we are based, your Pulton sir, 14 Grenadiers is also located here. They are watching you today with great gusto. Vijay has tried to cover up a lot of those gaps in the story. But sir, you are the only person who can bring the entire battleground alive for us. Over to you, sir.
On that day, the battalion was given the task, as Vijay had already brought out, and I was given the task to go behind the enemy lines and establish a roadblock initially, and later on, if required, you may have to attack the Darucia from the rear. Now the battle started. It got delayed because of our move, because we were passing through a difficult terrain, trying to avoid the enemy's knowledge to come about us. So the initial attack was by Bravo Company, commanded by Major Chahal, as Vijay had already brought out. And he got wounded. And that time I was ordered by Monsieur to come back from the roadblock and attack from the rear. Was a surprise, all right. But anyway, we moved back and came to the base of the Darucha feature and tried to attack from that side. During this move, or before this order I got, I could hear on the radio set that Major Chahal was wounded and the attack couldn't proceed further, so I was launched from the rear. Chahal and myself were together in college in Pilani, good friends. Now he spoke to me on the radio set that Hamidji, please move up as fast as you can and try to save us. So I told him, yes, I'm coming. Don't worry, Chahal. We will definitely help you out. Ultimately, we managed to reach, and once I have reached just about the Jeff's position, my CEO, he asked me, where are you? So I said, I am right towards my objective. I will be there soon. But somehow I don't know what happened. He didn't believe me, or so he asked me, please show me your location, which shouldn't have been done. I kept quiet for some time, but he said, Hamid, where are you? I said, I am just behind the enemy's location. Once the CEO asked me to give my location, since he was insisting time and again, I fired the very light pistol, and that gave my location to the enemy. And that is how they came to know. And later on, what happened, I think one should read in the book.
Sir, my last question is to Mrs. Hamir. Ma'am, namaskar. बहुत 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 वेलकम आपको सेशन में. आपकी वो फोटोग्राफ्स तो दिमाग में जैसे छप गई हैं जब आपके हस्बैंड वापस आ रहे थे और आप रेलवे स्टेशन पे उनका वेलकम कर रही हैं. लेकिन आज मैं आपसे ये जानना चाह रही हूँ, बहुत मुश्किल हुआ होगा उस समय. वो समय बहुत बहुत चैलेंजेस भरा होगा. बच्चे आपके छोटे छोटे थे. वो समय हमारे लिए अगर आप रीलिव कर सके उस मोमेंट को थोड़े से शब्दों में, तो प्लीज जरूर बताइए.
बहुत मुश्किल था. मैं नाइजीरिया से हम लोग आए थे. मैं अपने फादर के पास मिलने आई हुई थी. तो वेरी नेक्स्ट डे ही सेड कि ही हैज टू गो. मेरे को तो जाना ही पड़ेगा. तो मैंने कहा क्या हुआ? बोले फील्ड में पलटन उन्होंने बुलाया है. मैंने सोचा इनकी बहुत फील्ड सर्विस है तो आते जाते रहते हैं, तो फील्ड में जा रहे हैं. मैंने इनसे अच्छे से गुड बाय भी नहीं बोला और मैंने कहा ओके वी विल मीट सून. और वो ये चले गए. बाद में 5 दिन हो गए, 7 दिन हो गए, 8 दिन हो गए, वापस आए ही नहीं. ना कोई न्यूज ना कोई खबर. तो बाद में पता चला लड़ाई शुरू हो गई. फिर लड़ाई भी खत्म हो गई, फिर भी कोई न्यूज नहीं. फिर मेरे पेट में अजीब सा हो गया कि बात क्या हुई है ये. तो फिर भी मैं मेरे फादर सर्विस में थे, पुलिस सर्विस के. उन्होंने एक दिन आकर के मुझे बोला तुम बहादुर हो, तुम्हें मैं एक न्यूज बताता हूँ. मैंने कहा क्या हुआ? बोले वो तो गुम हो गए पर वापस आ जाएंगे. गुम हो गए वापस. मेरे को ऐसा सुनते ही ऐसा लगा कि मेरे पाँव के नीचे से जमीन खिसक गई. ना मुझे कुछ सुन रहा था ना मुझे कुछ दिखाई दे रहा था. पर दूर से मुझे आवाज आ रही थी संभालो संभालो अपने आप को. तो मैंने थोड़ी देर बाद जब आंख खोली तो देखा कि दोनों बच्चे मेरे सामने खड़े. मामा को क्या हो गया? मामा को क्या हो गया? मैंने कहा मैंने अपने आप को कंट्रोल किया. मामा को कुछ नहीं हुआ. मेरे फादर भी बोले तुम राजपूत लेडी हो, इस तरह से घबरा रही हो? हमारी तो जनरेशन लड़ाइयों में गई हुई है, कभी किसी राजपूत लड़की को ऐसे नहीं करना चाहिए. तो मैंने सोचा ठीक है. मैं चुपचाप से जो कुछ बर्दाश्त करके रात आ गई. रात को हम सो गए. सोने के थोड़ी सी देर बाद ये बच्चे उठे, बड़ा वाला खासतौर से, रोना शुरू हो गया जोर जोर से. मैंने कहा क्या हुआ है तुम्हें? मेरा मामा मुझे पापा को कोई ले जा रहे हैं पकड़ के, वो हमारे पास आना चाहते हैं तो उन्होंने आने नहीं दे रहे. तो मैंने कहा कुछ नहीं होगा तुम्हारे पापा को. फिर पापा ठीक है, बिल्कुल ठीक है, पापा ठीक है, इनको सुला दिया। फिर मुझे रात रात नींद नहीं आती थी। मैं राजपूत फैमिली से हूँ, हमारे कस्टम खराब। मैं उठ के रात को, आधी रात को अपने कपड़े देखती थी कि मुझे ये वापस से पहनने को मिलेंगे कि नहीं।
मैडम, आपने ये शेयर कर रहे हैं, आप वाकई में एक छतरानी हैं, एक छतरानी है। ऐसे
ऐसे
ये
लगता था।
समय और आप जो शेयर कर रही हैं वापस।
बाद में कई लोग ऐसे भी बोलते थे जो लड़ाई से वापस आए थे, सोल्जर कोई वापस गए थे, बोले हमने तो उनको खून में लथपथ देखा है, ये तो झूठी होप किए बैठे हैं, कोई नहीं आने वाला जाने वाला। किसी गैदरिंग में मेरे पेरेंट्स ले जाते हैं चेंज के लिए, तो सब लोगों के लिए मैं सेंटर ऑफ अट्रैक्शन होती। ये लड़की है जिसका आई वॉज ओनली 25 ईयर्स ओल्ड उस टाइम। दो छोटे छोटे यही है वो, यही है जिसके बहुत मुश्किल था, मैं आपको बता नहीं सकती। मेरे दिल में ऐसी दहशत बैठ गई कि जब ये वापस भी आ गए तब भी मैं रात को मेरी नींद खुल जाती और मैं इनको ऐसे टच करके देखती कि ये यही है ना, और बच्चों को देख के आती कि हम वापस बस गए हमारा घर, या हम दोनों सो रहे हैं। फिर मैं आके सोती, मुझे नींद आ जाती। ऐसा बहुत कठिन टाइम था, पर भगवान हिम्मत देता है। मेरे फादर ने 5 साल से आए थे सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर में, तो मुझे लगा कि कभी ना कभी तो आए जाए, एक उम्मीद तो रहती है ना दिल में।
आपकी उम्मीद ही थी मैम कि आपके पति वापस आपके पास आए, और बस ऐसे ही आप हमेशा हंसती रहें, जैसे उन फोटोज में हंस रही थी, बस वैसे ही हमेशा रहें।
Brigadier Hamid sir,
Yes,
tell us something about when you were in Pakistan. You spent 1 year. Tell us one incident, and thereafter, ma'am, आप बताइएगा जब वो वापस आए थे, आपकी फोटोग्राफ इतनी बढ़िया है, so one word, last word will be from you. Brigadier Hamid sir, in Pakistan.
yes, after the battle when I was captured, subsequently, I was actually brought to Rawalpindi, which initially I didn't know, but subsequently I came to know about it, that I was in so-and-so place, but I didn't know the date even. What happened that the last batch of wounded prisoners were to come to India on around 13th of June. 2 of us were there, myself and Major Surve from 39 GR. Anyway, Surve and another officer, they came back to India, and I requested later on to the Red Cross people who visited, please, I am left alone here, so better send me to a PW camp. I will have some company there if there is any, because I didn't know whether there was one or not. So I was taken to the prisoner of war camp, was a big jail in Lyleport. Thing which I wanted to bring out was that one day the commandant of the PW camp, he came to me and he told me today is Friday. I said, yeah, maybe, I don't know. He said, yes, today is Friday, and there are personnel from your company who are here with us. They want to meet you. I said, welcome, I would like to meet them. So he told me that today is a Friday, and at 1 o'clock we have that Friday prayer. Would you like to come at that time? I said, yes, no problem, I'll come. So I was guided to that place just few minutes before 1 o'clock, when everything was ready for the for the namaz. So then they said, okay, let's sit down. I said, no, I'll first go and do this normal activities which we do before namaz, washing our hands and face and all that. Then there was one officer, Major Said Jaman, who was accompanying me. He was surprised. He said, okay. Then after I wuju karne ke baad mein, I just sat behind the troops who were there. And I went through the whole ritual of namaz, which was surprised. The officer, he got surprised that I'm doing all this. The namaz finished, I met my people, and then this officer told me, what is this? So I said, look, I was commanding a Muslim company, and in our country, we do not have anything of religion serious. We have got Muslims, we have got Hindus, Sikhs, Christian, whatever it is. So the person who is commanding the battalion or commanding the company, he will adopt that particular religion for the time duration he is there. This is what we have been doing. So this made a very big impact on that officer. He went to the commandant and mentioned to him. So that is one occasion which I thought I will bring it out here.
And I will ask one question to ma'am. I will just insert one line on behalf of Colonel Sharad Awasthi, our mentor and team MLCC SF. I thank you all for this great session, the audience and the panelists. Ma'am, your question, and then Yashika, please sum up.
Okay.
We are tight. Ma'am, just what you felt when you met him at the railway station?
मैं कह रही हूँ कि इतने दिन से जो मैंने अपने आप को स्ट्रॉन्ग बना रखा था ना, उनको देखते ही जो मैंने रोना शुरू किया उसका कोई अंत ही नहीं था। बच्चे तो मेरा हाथ छुड़ा के दोनों, एक छोटे छोटे थे, 4-5 साल के, दोनों जाके पता नहीं कहाँ से भीड़ में घुसा करके अपने फादर के पास पहुंच गए। मैं देखती रही, और उस वक्त ऐसा था कि वापस में साथ नहीं रहने देते थे, इनको ले गए अलग बैरक्स में जहां पर इनका कुछ होता होगा, और मैं अलग आ गई। ये दिल्ली में हुआ। हमें ऐसे मिलने का कोई वो नहीं था, मिलने नहीं देते थे साथ में।
मेरा तो मन कर रहा है मैम, मैं आपके साथ आज मतलब डांस करूं। आप इतनी खुश, आज भी ऐसी खुश दिख रही हैं जैसे उस दिन खुश दिख रही होंगी।
क्या बताऊं आपको, ऐसे लगता है कि जैसे पता नहीं क्या मिरेकल हो गया, ऐसे लगता था। एकदम से एक अचानक हमें खबर मिली कि ये आ रहे हैं, अचानक ही मिली खबर, पहले से कोई खबर नहीं थी, अचानक अनाउंस हुआ कि आ रहे हैं। तो बस दिल्ली हम पहुंचे, और दिल्ली में ये उतरे ट्रेन से, बहुत भीड़ थी, जवान ऑफिसर्स रिसीव करने वाले। हम लोग दूर से इनको देख रहे थे, इन्होंने भी हमें देखा, फिर इनको हॉस्पिटल भी ले गए, ये वुंडेड थे इसलिए वहां भी रखा, ऐसा था।
बहुत आपने तो वो समय ऐसे बांध दिया है सामने। ब्रिगेडियर हमीर सर ने पूरी लड़ाई का एक ऐसा ताना बाना बुना सामने, आपने वो इमोशंस बताए। थैंक यू वेरी मच। बहुत मुश्किल है ये शेयर करना आज भी, पर आप दोनों ने इतना दिल खोलकर शेयर किया। वेरी थैंकफुल टू यू। एंड ब्रिगेडियर हमीर सर, फॉर यू दिस लाइन, that man apart, every man an emperor. Thank you so much for making us a part of your story. So at the end of this discourse, I feel that the common thread runs through these 3 stories that we touched upon today. The soldiers taken MIA were doing their duty that they were trained for to the best of their ability. And they had full faith in the system, that the system will look out for them and their loved ones should anything befall them. They believed in, ours is not to ask why, ours is to do and die. During every war, the citizens of Cham were made to leave their homeland, live like refugees in their own land, never ask a question. They too had a faith in system. Brigadier Hamir and other POW like him fought the doomed battle till last bullet, till they were captured. Their families lived through living hell, We have seen how Lakshmi ma'am's eyes still well when she speaks about him. Their families lived through hell even after India had won the war. No questions asked. And while the nation rejoiced, they patiently waited and prayed for the return of their loved ones, just because they had faith in the system. Thank you and Jai Hind.